Throughout the world, oysters and mussels are quintessential icons of a seaside lifestyle. And for good reason. These coastal bivalves filter water, stabilize sediments, build habitats, improve chemical cycling, and form the base of a global harvesting industry. Imperiling these amazing benefits, however, are a number of risks, including overharvesting, habitat loss, and predation that have led to immense global declines in shellfish reefs. To address this decline, many research groups, NGOs, and conservation networks have emerged, as well as an outpouring of publications and scientific data on shellfish reef conservation and restoration. This research output is a good sign for our shellfish reefs. However, it is often scattered, paywalled, or difficult to find, leaving conservation managers without the best data. Additionally, the information that is available needs to be applicable to the specifics of the conservation project. Without clear, relevant data, conservation projects are hamstrung before they even begin. We sought to address this concern by compiling and analyzing the existing evidence base of shellfish reef conservation and restoration, ultimately improving accessibility for conservation managers and shedding light on where future efforts should be focused. To accomplish our goal of systematically reviewing the shellfish reef conservation evidence base, we first developed a clear set of inclusion parameters. Articles included in the review needed to be peer-reviewed, in English, focus on oysters or mussels, enact some kind of conservation intervention, have a comparator for experimental analysis, and measure an outcome from the conservation action. We searched through two databases, Web of Science and Scopus, for any relevant articles using a comprehensive search string, then looked through each article to see if it met the inclusion criteria. Ultimately, this resulted in 281 articles that underwent an in-depth coding process, where they were categorized based on factors like when the research was conducted, what species were studied, where the study was based, who conducted the research, what types of conservation interventions were undertaken, and what kinds of outcomes were measured. The results of the review process revealed some clear patterns. First, research in shellfish conservation and restoration is growing rapidly, with more than 70% of the articles published in the last decade. This growth is impressive, but largely concentrated in just a few areas. For example, starting with who is conducting the research reveals some startling trends. Collaboration across sectors and disciplines is a vital part of the scientific process, and has been shown to facilitate knowledge sharing, problem solving, and partnership building. However, for shellfish reef conservation, only 40% of articles demonstrate a collaboration between academic, NGO, or governmental sectors. In fact, over half of all articles were written with only academic authors, leaving out vital potential contributions from NGOs or governmental organizations. Even more striking, only 2% of articles included any form of Indigenous knowledge in their methodology or results, despite evidence that Indigenous knowledge and participation can deliver significant benefits to shellfish reef conservation. Moving beyond authorship, when it came to study species, 31 species were studied, but the evidence base was still heavily skewed, as more articles studied the eastern oyster than every other species combined. Geographically, the evidence base is also limited, as 65% of studies were conducted in North America, followed by 15% in Europe and 9% in Oceania. Studies conducted in Africa, Asia, and South America each comprise less than 5% of the total evidence base. The kinds of conservation interventions undertaken were also revealing. Conservation managers have the choice of many different types of actions they can conduct to conserve or restore shellfish reefs. From ecological actions like direct transplants of oysters or mussels and habitat creation, to legislative actions like establishing a marine protected area or building legal ramifications to pollution, and social actions like starting social media campaigns or economically incentivizing alternative livelihoods. There are a lot of different facets to a comprehensive shellfish reef conservation strategy. However, 95% of articles include an ecological intervention in their methods, compared to only 19% for legislative intervention and just 7% for social. This trend is also clear in the outcomes measured by researchers, as ecological outcomes, like reef health and habitat structure, are measured in 96% of studies, while social outcomes, like human well-being or economic impact, are measured in just 12% of studies, despite comprising a significant rationale behind the development of many of these projects in the first place. Ultimately, these two categories of conservation intervention undertaken and outcome measured can be directly correlated with one another. Here, each column represents a different intervention category, while each row comprises a category of outcome. The crossings indicate how many articles study the impacts of that intervention on that outcome. The first square, for example, shows that 124 articles study the impacts of land or water management on a specific population or species of shellfish, while the next square down shows that 84 articles study the impacts of that same intervention on the broader ecological community. This kind of visual device, called a systematic evidence map, reveals clear gaps in the research base. Here, for example, it's clear that there's a significant gap for research studying the social impacts of legislative and social interventions. An important caveat is that this is not necessarily reflective of the full evidence base, as non-English language articles and gray literature like agency reports are not included, which may shift some of these results and is an area for future research. It is also important to note that an even evidence base, one where there is perfectly equal distribution of research across every country, species, and action, is not the goal of any conservation strategy. However, a heavily skewed evidence base can lead to numerous issues. Conservation is most effective when it is grounded in successful, relevant research conducted under similar circumstances. If a conservation manager is trying to undertake a project, but the evidence base is completely unreflective of their own situation, then the project is at a disadvantage from the very beginning. For shellfish reef conservation, this means that many projects are hindered by an evidence base so heavily skewed towards research on a single species from a single country, conducted by a single group, studying a single type of interventions, and measuring a single kind of outcome. Addressing the uneven nature of shellfish conservation research activity will require concrete efforts to diversify future projects for both researchers and funding bodies. Firstly, future conservation projects need to expand to a wider range of species beyond the eastern oyster. Secondly, greater priority needs to be placed on shellfish conservation projects outside of the United States and Northern Europe, which represent the study location for 80% of the papers in this review. Thirdly, cross-sector collaboration, particularly with authors outside of academia, should be sought for future projects, as authors in NGOs, governmental organizations, industry, and non-academic local institutions can contribute valuable knowledge and different perspectives to research. Finally, shellfish conservation projects should look beyond just ecological interventions and outcomes and consider studying the impacts of social measures, which can hold valuable information on more effective management options, yet remain lightly studied. By diversifying the evidence base now, we can better ensure the success of future projects, improve the field of shellfish reef conservation, and keep these vital ecosystems a part of our lives. Hi ICSR, thanks for watching my presentation, and I wish I could join y'all in person. I just want to end by acknowledging some of the people who have been vital to this whole process. First, my advisors, Andrew Jeffs, Jen Hillman, and Sean Handley, who were essential to this process. Second, Emily Benjamin and Rebecca Hunter, who served as the power behind a lot of that article review machine. And finally, to Willa Brooks, Morgan Rudd, and the rest of the Duke Bass Connections team, who designed a lot of the framework behind the systematic evidence map. Also, this research was just recently published out in Restoration Ecology, so you can check that out for the full database and a lot more details. And you can also reach out to me via email or on Twitter. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.